Welcome everyone to a new episode of CC5's podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, Michael Muse from the University of Warwick. He will introduce himself, of course. He's been helping us with our feedback tool for quite some time now, almost a year actually. And this time, we are very curious to hear about his day job as an English professor. So, Michael, why don't you introduce yourself a bit?
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me. It has been really fun working with you. So I'm a Canadian British academic, and I teach English literature and theater. And alongside that, and kind of as part of teaching that, I have worked for years in writing programs. And so, yeah, a big part of what I do is writing instruction. And I noticed I'm just gonna. I noticed that I have a some light across my forehead there, which I'm going to fix. So yeah. That's the deal.
Okay, so on your homepage, which I studied with great interest, you describe yourself as a performance historian with a side hustle in literature. So, can you elaborate that a little bit for us?
I mean, yeah. So firstly, we all have to pump ourselves up on our faculty pages, but I've always been interested in the way that literature, which is usually thought of as very abstract, gets out into the real world. And theater is one of those places. It's the most concrete form of whatever we connect with literature. And writing instruction is kind of the same way. Writing is where we take something, writing about literature, writing through literature, which is very abstract, and we make it into a process, and we make it into like a for the writer, and I think this is underappreciated. It's like a meditation. It's a thing that you do to you're not just trying to get a mark. What you're trying to do is kind of model yourself, model how you think reflectively about your own thought processes. My brother's a software developer, and he has this wonderful term, which I just learned from him, called rubber ducking, which is where if you're a programmer, you have on your desk a rubber duck, and if you're trying to figure out how to do something you don't quite understand, you had a process you haven't figured out, you explain it to the duck, and in doing that, it helps you figure out what you're thinking. And theater is sort of the most complicated form we have of a very social and very extended rubber ducking. We bring the ideas out into the world and let them breathe. So yeah, that's always been where my interest has been.
So, if I read performance historian, I think that there seems to be a difference between, let's say, what is written out as a script of a play and how it's actually brought to stage. Am I right there? So you're more interested in how it's brought to the stage than the script, or
The yes, I mean the short answer is yes. The longer and somewhat professorial answer is that all of these things, the script, the history of the script, and what we can recover from it, the opportunities that the script offers for itself to be performed, all of these things are elements that we can bring to the analysis to figure out either what the playwright wanted or how we might put it on, or even how people at the time or how people at the time were thinking through that script, or how we might think through it or use it to think ourselves. And there's no one answer. Different kinds of analyses will use different aspects of what you described, either the script, its history, how people thought then through it, how we might ourselves use it to think now. It's just part of the the kind of the multiple things that we can bring to it to answer different questions at different moments.
interesting. So right now you're also working on an advanced reading manual for Jane Austen's work. I mean, Jane Austen, these are novels. These are not plays or theatrical work per se. So where's the link here? And yeah, before we go on, so maybe just what's linking the two?
So Jane Austen was the in Austen's time, and this is not particularly well known, but novels got performed often. And Austen, we know that she performed the novels for her family. So she was the first, we assume, performer of her work. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
overlap there. But even it's most people when they consume the novels don't consume them out loud. They read them. And my interest in Austen is that again, I think of it as the word is metaleptic. It works on multiple levels. Austen is works on the greatest number of levels of any writer that I'm aware of. She's the greatest technical writer that I'm aware of in the English language in the sense that she has command over really particular technical aspects of writing that years into studying her, I still find new surprises in how that works. She's also a writer who essentially invents the romantic comedy, or at least refines the form, and is also, for a lot of people, a very comforting writer. And if you think of it, those three things are almost diametrically opposed. Romance makes us nervous, technical writing is cold, and comfort is neither cold and extremely comforting. And the novels do all of these things at the same time at once. So, yeah, that's my interest is in, along with that externalized thinking, that the novels model because they were originally meant to be, they were originally performed out loud, along being read. Yeah, they just do as many things at once as possible as any writer that I'm aware of.
So how has writing changed in these 200 years since Jane Austen? I mean, it's a long time, and if I read some German text from
Mhm.
200 years ago, I find myself sometimes struggling with, yeah, what is written, how it's written, the understanding of writing. So how is it in English?
I think the single biggest difference is the incredible materiality of writing for them. A letter in Austen's time would have been written on paper that to us would seem incredibly luxurious. It had an extended life. Letters usually circulated among multiple senders. They weren't Privacy is a notion that they understood very differently, particularly around letters. The physical word or the word had a cost that it doesn't have for us. I think if someone from that time were to see how we communicate in routine ways, they would be stunned how much language we're surrounded by, how easily we can write and revise, and how much text we can generate and do generate just in our daily lives as devices log data for us, and now language models generate reams of text for us. So that something so essential can shift in such a short period of time, that our practice of writing would be in some ways unrecognizable is interesting. The one hears, no one knows where LLMs are going entirely right now, but one of the things that we hear is that it's going to entirely change how we write, and those shifts have happened before. How we write now is there's been a kind of a series of total changes in writing that we don't experience because
Mhm.
we weren't alive at the time. So yeah, I think that's the
Yeah.
single biggest difference.
So if we take AI out of the picture for a moment, just from the perspective of um, the language itself and what is considered good writing and bad writing, do you think there has been a shift also in these 200 years?
Yes, I think this in that regard, and kind of as a follow-on to this notion of the I mean, oddly, actually, with the expense of writing in earlier times, there was much more license to be verbose, to have extended communications, to have a style of writing that, if you read a 19th century novel, you can have these, paragraphs that have sentences that have colons and semicolons that go on for over a page. There was a kind of assumed among the classes who read novels and wrote to each other, there was a kind of an assumption of leisure that you can see in the page itself, even if you can't actually recover directly what people's lives were like. And that is, I think, just the occasion of writing was with the more expensive paper. The occasion of writing had more time set aside for it,
Mhm.
and so through that, the writing was just allowed a dynamic we don't often allow writing now.
Interesting. Yeah. So how important is writing in your teaching? So in the courses you teach?
It's so it's 100% to 80% of the assessment. So write out on that important side of things. But it assessment, I mean, assessment is incredibly valuable, but it's not just a dry exercise. It's the writing is in all of the modules that I teach, to use the English term. It's where the concepts that we discuss in class get refined and worked out and offered to the student in a way. I mean, in a sense, the essay is kind of like that 18th century writing. It's an
Hmm.
extended period of time to consider and reflect through research and then formalized writing practices. And
Hmm.
the whole point of the modules, in some sense, the word that's used in writing instruction is capstone. The capstone of the modules is that people learn to write papers that are people write papers that are extended reflections on what we describe in
Hmm.
the module. And in particular, there's two concepts that I think are really important that we don't emphasize enough. And one is voice, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit,
Yeah.
where students learn how to refine their mode of expression through an extended period of writing. The other is taste, where students figure out where their interests are and how to understand their interests objectively, how to be able to put your concepts and ideas in a way that someone else can understand and that you can understand better through imagining someone else understanding it. We stand outside of ourselves through formal writing and we learn to
Hmm.
appreciate our own taste better.
I mean, you so when you teach and your students write about something, I mean, you've seen probably the same things over and over again, but is it really often that students still surprise you with what they write and the ideas that they come up with?
Continually, and that's not just being agreeable for the purposes of a podcast.
Well,
In
there's none
particular,
of your students is in here now, so nobody can object.
no, no. Genuinely, the thing that is, I think, underappreciated is that the details in any literary text, anything worthwhile, is hundreds of pages or hundreds of lines of very, very finely packed details. And so, a really well-attuned observer, and my students are all really well-attuned observers, will find new details. And it's not just it's an artificial binary to say that the details and the ideas are somehow separate from each other. Even a really well understood idea will seem differently if you run it through a
Mm,
detail that hasn't been noted before or commented on. And so there's a continual process of discovery for me, because it just in the just having a cloud of minds thinking about these books, they uncover new details and thus new versions of the ideas every time they write. No, every week, practically every class, it keeps
mm.
me. It's one of the very small number of things these days keeping me young.
Very, very interesting. So you said you're also involved in the writing courses or writing programs of your university.
Mhm.
And I mean, from what you've just said, I would be interested to hear what's the difference is between, let's say, people from a more um, natural sciences background when they have to write, as opposed to people from humanities or social sciences.
Humanities and social sciences, every academic field, in a way that's not very helpful, but works all right. Every academic field is defined by the evidence that they consider, and every evidence brings with it a set of protocols for interpreting it. And so, because our evidence is so different from what's processed in the sciences, and because our protocols are very different, the biggest difference is just in the kind of the under as I say the understood protocols for engaging with the evidence. And that's not a very elegant way of putting it, but the range of details that if you've been trained up in what we do, the range of details that you notice in a literary text, if you bring an architect into a building or you bring a biologist into nature, there are just patterns that they notice, and our pattern recognition tends to be a little bit specialized and different, because of how the fields have
Mm,
grown up. because,
Yeah.
what we study is the most their particular sort of gatherings of complexity in literary texts. And so learning to unpack those and learning how to kind of get at the ideas that come up when these accretions of complexity is not a very elegant term, but when these kinds of sort of knotted up versions of human thinking, when we unpack them, what we find is that the training in that is how we're a little bit different from
Yeah.
the other side.
I think in
Yeah.
the end, what matters is how well are you in bringing the thought that you have in your head across to the head of the reader. I think Stephen King at one point calls it almost telepathy through the medium of the written word. You want to evoke an image that you have in your head, in the head of the reader. And what differs is probably whether your thoughts are around a piece of writing or it is a piece of experimental evidence or some equation that you came up with.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it goes on. There's a kind of a feedback loop quality to it as well, where we learn to structure our own thinking for ourselves when we imagine other people reading
Yeah.
it, and so it is communication to the reader, but the reader is not there. What's actually there is ourselves dealing with another part of ourselves as we imagine a reader kind of, and as we imagine a reader
Mm.
interacting with it. So other people are part of how we imagine ourselves.
So in these courses, so what is the most common problem that you encounter, or phrased differently, what is the most common advice that you give?
I was told as a grad student, I say this all the time, that the writing is struggling to match a new complexity of ideas. And what I like about saying that is you'll say it to a sentence or a paragraph or a section that's not working particularly well, but genuinely most of the time when that happens, there's just a quality that you learn to recognize where someone is struggling to articulate something, and often that something will be, you've been reading for patterns of words, but suddenly you're taking on how those patterns of words can express something as abstract as philosophy, and the prose suffers. People who are competent writers, suddenly there'll be subject verb agreement issues, or there'll be spelling mistakes or
Mm.
something like that. And I think of it, it's like when you have a computer that's struggling to run more processes than it's used to run, and maybe those processes are coded very badly, and so they're taking up a huge amount of your processor time, and the machine stutters. But it's not what I loved about that advice, and why I like giving it is it's not negative.
Mm.
It's indicating that there's just there's a lot more going on here than you may have been used to taking on, but it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah. So coming back to the things that are probably a bit harder to explain. I mean, you mentioned somewhere on your homepage the importance of voice, and we've talked about it a little bit earlier. And I'm just wondering, um, voice, I think, is a level of expression that requires quite a bit of practice to master, because otherwise you are probably caught in one particular voice and you do not have the let's say, the nimbleness or the finesse to actually switch between different voices. So, how important is it?
It's the end point of why we encourage people to write. I think we hide that sometimes, but it is the goal is to come out of one of our courses, one of our degree programs with a refined version of your own voice, but also a sense of what it is, a sense of how you write. And the mistake I think that often happens is people, a classic question you get asked is, well, what do you want us to write on the paper? And obviously there are requirements involved. We do have things like that in mind, but also part of what we want is for the student to, through a combination of the details they notice, the structure of their sentences, and the way they respond to the assignment, to the genre that the essay or the assignment is written in, to get some sense of their own. A voice is a combination of what you look for, how you express it, and how you think about those things. And we
Mm,
want some version of that.
yeah.
Some version of just an individual sensibility expressed in a way that another mind has access to it.
And I mean, we touched upon the issue of AI. So if I use AI to help me write, I'm certainly drawn towards the voice that AI will imbue into the words. So how do you think voice will going to look like with AI on and what's your advice how to deal with that?
AI models we're reading have this problem where as more of the internet is itself AI generated, the quality of some models has degraded because there's no new input coming into the system. There's just, again, there's a
Mm,
feedback loop
yeah.
happening. And I think there's something very similar for writers, that if you don't an AI can provide you a voice and a very developed voice. In a sense, it's a more developed voice because the hundreds of thousands of years of human expression go into that voice in some ways. It's a prefabricated voice potentially, and if you don't develop your own voice, there's nothing that you sort of offer in balance to that
Mm,
that just kind of rush of pre-processed a voice. And so I think that I really like working with language models. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't. But the problem for students is if you let a model that you grant your paper, you give it over, you say write the whole paper, you will never develop your own voice. It will simply
mm,
be a
yeah.
thing that a thing that you get from the model. At the same time, models have incredible power to help you with a voice, to be an interlocutor as you figure out what your voice is, and to tell you what your voice is, to break it down, to summarize, to give advice. So it's a hard question to answer in part because there is no one way to use a language model. Some students will use it for individual sentences, which I think is getting closer to the right way. Some will use it to ask for overall feedback on an assignment, which is also, I think a very good use of the models. Some will use it to write the whole thing, and in that case, it's not developmental. And I
Well,
think
it's
kind of
defeating the
one time.
purpose a little bit. Um,
Yeah,
but I think I mean, at a different occasion, we talked about that. So my impression is that nowadays we are kind of forced to become of the aware that if we tell students to write an abstract, we're actually asking them to do two things. And one is implicit and the other one is explicit. So the explicit thing is write an essay, which the student nowadays, of course, says, okay, so I head over to ChatGPT and have it generated for me. But the implicit thing is read this book, think carefully about it, get an opinion, and try to convince me of your opinion. And that bit is kind of lost because in the good old times, the only way you could do that was either by giving a presentation or by
yeah.
handing in an essay. And now with these tools, we are suddenly becoming aware of the fact that the actual important bit was not explicitly stated so far.
Yeah. I think it's making us, we who assign essays and other academic writing less lazy and more, we're going to have to just communicate what we wanted all along and say what the discrete parts of writing an essay prepare you for, what they do, what the benefit is for completing all of the different
Mm,
sort of discrete parts of an essay. So it's
yeah.
definitely made me less lazy. Don't know if I can speak to all of my colleagues, but I think for all of us, we're just having to actually say what we wanted.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, some of your colleagues, they lamented that, well, the essay is essentially dead with AI, and so they're either abandoning it or they're even going back to handwritten assignments. Actually, I just checked earlier on Google and I found that um, text to handwriting is quite a well-searched term.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that?
I mean, firstly, if they think that models can't make handwriting. That's something that I think they're actually quite good at. I think that we're probably going to have to I, we don't quite know what we're doing yet. It'll be a couple of years, and I think we'll have probably there'll be kind of a recognized solution in place. I think probably part of our assessment is going to have to go offline, just to
Mm.
make sure that students have developed the skills to work without models, and we'll have exam rooms where there'll be offline terminals, and students can write shorter versions of essays in those. I think also,
Or you
being
give them
upfront.
a pencil.
I can barely myself. My handwriting is so terrible. I haven't written an assignment in so long that I'm not a
Yeah.
big fan of the pencil just because it feels like it's like adding like jogging or something, a physical act
Mm.
that we don't associate anymore with writing to writing.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
yeah, I think it'll be actually a relatively straightforward thing to sort out, a kind of test to see if students have actually been writing papers or not.
Mm. So do you
Um,
think that the curricula should embrace or should embrace AI tools, should include them? Should there be a module on how to use an LLM for writing?
I don't think we have a choice. I mean, we have to live in amidst our, the historical circumstances that we're in the middle of, and we might as well, leaving aside that these models are really interesting and that every change in technology, we talked earlier, it would be, I'm sure there were people who said you couldn't use a word processor in the 80s and that
Mm.
no one thinks about anymore. And in a technology that will be just de rigueur in 10 or 15 or 4 years, it seems silly sort of not to embrace it. But I think this approach that we've been using throughout, just be more focused on the smaller uses of it and
Yeah.
explain what the benefit of using it is and what the benefit of originally writing the essay at all is going to be really essential to just not, to give students a reason to turn the model off and do the work
Mm.
themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly got chastised during my studies for using a computer to analyze experimental data. I mean, think about that. That was in a physics laboratory, and I don't know, we had this hundreds of numbers that we measured, and we needed to calculate a mean and a standard deviation. And we used a computer to do that.
Yeah.
And the exact not ex the assistants at that time, the tutors, they were upset by that. There was no rule forbidding it, but anyway, now it's a standard. Um,
Well, and think about how much more scientific work we're able to do now that computers can take up some of that slack. It could be the same with writing, that now that we
I
have
think
that,
so too.
yeah,
It's but of course, I mean that there's this other issue. I mean, when I went to school or to universities, and the professors usually used to tell me, look, we know every method to cheat that there is, and
yeah.
you won't be able to outsmart us. And nowadays, I have the impression it's the other way around because the adoption, so from all the studies that I've seen, about every student is using AI, but only a small fraction of the teachers and professors are actually um, using AI and or even have used it at all. So there is this huge gap in proficiency between the students and the teaching staff. And so what do you think? Will it take some time to adapt? Will the universities actually adapt?
I mean, we're adapting right now, and I think the number of my colleagues who sort of don't. I mean, I think everyone knows that it's there. It's the sort of thing we talk a lot about at staff meetings, and we're more responsive than the caricature of university
Mm,
staff would make us seem. And some of the adaptations also, I mean, up to a certain point, the why we assign papers is to give our students a kind of mental gymnasium to improve how they think and write. Past a certain point, if people want to not take advantage of that and just submit work that was in effect written by someone else, degree mills have been a part of university life for a long time.
mm,
I've read more papers written by someone else than I will ever know because we didn't really have a way of checking for them, and that will continue continue at a greater pace. The question, not to be too professorial and ask sort of what is behind the question that you're asking, but also the question is sort of what do we want to do when we adapt? What does adaptation mean? And I, I think we are. It will be in 4 or 5 years. You know, I'm talking to you now over a video conference and our video link. And during COVID, we pivoted as universities to working online like that. And it's now just a
Mm.
part of how we teach and we conduct our meetings. We that was unthinkable a couple of years before
Yes.
this happened.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think something similar will happen with writing instruction. It's not that conceptually difficult to imagine a way to guarantee that part of writing instruction is still on a computer but offline, and that part of it is handed
Yeah.
over to the student as an opportunity to conduct however they want.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, it's a fascinating discussion, but I think we have to watch our time a little bit.
Of course, no,
So, just
yeah.
just as the final advice from you, yeah. So let's say I have an essay due maybe next week, and I'm staring at my blank page, and my mind is also blank. What's your advice how to get started?
Yeah, rubber duck. Have that's been I'm saying it all the time. Thank you, David, my brother, for this. So have an externalized object, or use the ChatGPT is a great, or any other model that you're using is a
Hmm.
great way to start a conversation about something as long as you limit how far you let it go. The other advice that I always give is close read. I've talked throughout if I wanted this to have a leitmotif, it's detail and the importance
Mm.
of the individual detail as a way of developing a voice, having a personality, bringing that personality into the structured thinking that we model through essays. Close read, just read a passage, and this is such a hard thing to convey that we want students to convey their interests. So if there is a part of the novel or the text that
Mm.
interested you, if I say point blank, what was the most interesting part for you? That small detail, start there, read it, analyze it, and rather than feel that you have to bring a prepackaged idea and kind of force the as we say the round peg of the thesis into the square hole, or I guess it's the round peg of the detail into the square hole of the argument, rather than force an argument. Start by interpreting a small detail,
Mm.
and then you've heard me say this a lot, but iterate. Do that a couple of times, run it a couple of times, and you'll find in that, particularly if you have an interlocutor, a friend, a professor, or a model, a couple of rounds back and forth should give you the details to start your
Mm.
own writing. So that's been my advice. It's what I do, being really honest these days, how I proceed. I'm starting a new project and it's, I start with the details and I move on.
Okay. Thanks very much, Michael. It was very interesting to hear
Pleasure.
your
Yeah.
perspective
Yeah.
and was very nice having you on the show.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
for everybody
Yeah.
else, thanks for listening and see you next time on the Thesify podcast.